to 5 diagnostic pearls in ophthalmology, and we have Dr. Pranav Ranjan with us, who will be sharing his screen, and he will be presenting to us. Dr. Pranav?
Yeah. Good afternoon, good morning.
Okay, sir.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Pranab.
Hi. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Hi.
Good. Thank you so much, sir. Very good morning to all of you, and I welcome you to the first ever virtual conference of All India Ophthalmic Society. And at the outset, I would like to thank the office bearers of the society for giving me an opportunity to present this before you all. We have the 5 diagnostic pearls in ophthalmology, and the 5 ophthalmic pearls are the OCT, which will be dealt by Dr. Devesh Kumawat. Topography will be dealt by Dr. Pranita Sahai. Fundus fluorescent angiography by Shivani Sinha. Biometry and IOL power calculation by Dr. Jayagopal Agarwal. And
Dr. Pranav, your presentation is not coming. Your screen is shared, but presentation is not on.
no, this just one this is one shot. This is one shot. I'll just after that. And the last will be the perimetry will be dealt by me. So let me have the slideshow. Where is the slideshow? Okay, right. So I'll just briefly introduce the various speakers. Dr. Devesh Kumawat, he's an assistant professor in Lady Hardinge Medical College, Delhi, ex-assistant professor, AIIMS Rishikesh, MBBS from AIIMS, MD from AIIMS Delhi, also done senior residency in Vittoretna, UV and ROP from RP Center, AIIMS, FRCS Ophthalmology, FICO, DNB from National Board of Examination, has over 65 PubMed indexed publications in peer-reviewed journals, has presented various, has presentations in various national and international conferences. One of the speakers, Dr. Pranita Sahai, is MBBS from Patna Medical College, MD and senior residency from RP Center, AIIMS Delhi, DNB, ICO in refractive surgery, FACO. She is an ex-assistant professor of Lady Hardinge Medical College, Delhi. Presently, she is working as an assistant professor in University College of Medical Sciences, Delhi, has 79 publications and has presented in various national and international conferences. The third speaker, Dr. Shivani Sinha, is a MBBS and MS from King George Medical College, University, Lucknow. She's a senior resident in Retina, UV and ROP services, IJMS Patna. She's a member scientific committee of BOS, that is Bihar Ophthalmic Society. She is a fellow of Vittoretna from Narayana Nethralaya, Bangalore, has 14 peer-reviewed publications, co-authored 5 chapters in a book, in various books, and is a recipient of Weaver Travel Grant in ARVO 2017. Old friend of mine, Dr. Jayagopal Agarwal, MBBS MS from Patna Medical College, senior consultant in Purji Hospital and Agarwal Eye Center Research, Patna, past president of Patna Ophthalmic Society, has several awards and presentations in state, national, and international conferences. And this is me almost equal to what I have stated for Dr. Agarwal. Presently, I am the honorary secretary of ISOP, East India Zona Ophthalmic Congress also. So with this brief introduction, I would like my first speaker, there will be a change in sequence because also having participation in different ICs at the same time. So I'd like to request Dr. Shivani Sinha with her presentation on FFA, fundus fluorescent angiography. Dr. Shivani, please, if you are here, the screen is yours for your presentation. She is a young dynamic ophthalmologist trained from Narayana Nethralaya, Bangalore. presently working in a prestigious institution, Indira Gandhi Institute of Medical Sciences, which also has the regional, which is also the regional institute of ophthalmology. Dr. Shivani.
Good morning, sir. Sir, is my screen visible?
Yeah, your screen
Am
is
I
visible.
audible now?
Yeah, you're audible.
Thank you, AIOC, for giving me the opportunity, and special thanks to Dr. Pranav for giving me the opportunity to present over here. And my topic is fundus fluorescent angiography. So what actually is FFA? So it refers to photography of the fluorescent dye in the retinal vasculature to study different kinds of retinal vascular pathophysiological conditions. So basically it uses the principle of fluorescence, and the fluorescent dye diffuses out of the fenestrated vessels of the choriocapillaries, but not out of the healthy endothelial cells of the non-fenestrated retinal vessels and RPE. Therefore, it is very suitable for studying the retinal vascular disease. So we have to be aware about the exciter filter, which filters out the which filters the other lights except the blue light, and the barrier filter, which filters out the rest of the light except the light in the yellow-green wavelength. We should be aware of the pseudofluorescence, which occurs when there is a mismatch between exciter and the barrier filter. So the dose is basically 10 ml of 5% solution, or 5 ml of 10% solution, 3 ml of 25%, and it is eliminated by the liver and the kidneys over 24 hours. So when we inject fluorescein, about 80% is bound to the plasma proteins and the blood cells. Only 20% is available, which is free and is used in imaging. So basically, this is the outlay. We use the excitation energy, and the fluorescent is it is excited and it emits energy in the yellow-green wavelength, which is photographically documented and which we see as a FFA photo. So coming to the sequence of the events. So we should have a patient identification photograph, a color photograph, a red-free photograph of the posterior pole. We have to insert the scalp vein needle and slowly inject over 4 to 6 seconds, not more than that, because it will lead to dilution, and then the fluorescence would be very faint for us to see. So we should have a pre-injection photograph and then start fluorescent photography. Before at the time of injection, we should be aware about the side effects of the fluorescent dye. So it can range from mild to severe. Mild is simply nausea, vomiting, pruritus, sneezing, which can be managed by antihistaminics. Moderates are usually urticaria and other kind of allergic reaction, which needs to be managed again by the antihistaminic and paracetamol. But we should be aware about the severe allergic reaction, which can range from bronchospasm to seizures, and we should have a crash cart ready. So what are the indications for FFA? So it is diagnostic, especially for retinal vascular disorders. We use it to follow up to monitor the disease activity, and also is used to prognosticate the disease activity. So relative contraindications being renal impairment, the anginal instability, severe asthma, and pregnancy. So how does a normal angiogram look like? The appearance of dye, it occurs earlier in young age where there is hyperdynamic circulation, approximately 10 to 12 seconds. In old age, it usually takes longer, 12 to 15 seconds. And this arm retina time is very important because in cases of cardiovascular diseases, in cases of ICA occlusion, this time prolongs. So there are 6 phases of angiogram: pre-arterial, arterial, arteriovenous, venous, recirculation, and late. So this is a pre-arterial phase where we can see the patchy lobular filling of the choroid, which is known as choroidal flush. And this happens, the retina starts, usually the retinal vessel starts to appear, the filling starts 1 second after the choroidal flush. And in this, we can see there is a filling of the cilio-retinal artery, which is a branch of the posterior ciliary arteries. Coming to the arterial phase, we can see the filling of the arteries over here. In the arteriovenous, we can see the laminar flow in the veins. And this means the arteries have filled, the capillaries have filled, and the veins have just started to fill. And in the venous phase, we can see the whole of the veins also have filled. So the peak phase is approximately around 20 to 25 seconds after a rapid fluorescent injection. This is very important as the perifoveal capillary network is highlighted, and we can very well see the FAZ over here. The transit phase is usually after 30 seconds, and it denotes the first complete passage of the fluorescence. So the recirculation phase starts, and here the elimination and the dilution of the dye is starting to occur. Therefore, the fluorescence has started to fade away. So the late usually is 10 to 30 minutes, and it denotes nearly extinction of the fluorescence. So this is the time, phase, and the event which is occurring. So choroidal flush, it denotes the dye reaching the short posterior ciliary arteries. The arterial phase, which starts after a second of the choroidal flush, it denotes the dye reaching the central retinal arteries. The capillary phase, the capillaries are perfused. The AV and the venous phase denotes the filling of the veins. And the late denotes the recirculation, dilution, and the elimination of the dye. The timings are very important as AV phase can be prolonged in cases of ocular ischemic syndrome and in cases of central retinal vein occlusion. So how do we interpret an angiogram? So before we go, there are certain steps which we should follow while interpreting a FFA. We should have patient identification. We should have the concerned eye labeled. We should have a color photograph for clinical correlation. We should have a description of the angiogram. We should have a phase and a time sequence. And we should be aware about the level of pathology, whether it is retinal, subretinal, or intraretinal, pre-retinal, or the choroidal at the level of choroid. And we should have a DD in our mind. So the angiographic description of the lesion are usually classified as hyperfluorescence or the hyperfluorescence. So the hypo can be due to the vascular filling defect or blocked fluorescence. Hyper can be due to window defect, vascular abnormality, pooling, staining, and leakage. Basically, the difference between pooling, staining, and leakage is pooling is it is the collection of the dye in a defined anatomical space, as happens in NSD. Staining, the fluorescence increases, but the intensity and the size goes on increasing. The leakage, also the size and the intensity increases over time. The autofluorescence, this is a photo of angiogram of where we can see the normal fovea, which is avascular, because the normal fovea, which is dark due to avascularity, and because of the melanin, the hyperfluorescence is blocked from the choroidal vasculature, and also the increased xanthophyll density blocks the fluorescence from the deeper choroidal vessels. So why is it important to look at the normal fovea? Because fovea is enlarged and irregular with capillary budding, which we see here in cases of ischemic maculopathy. So a fovea which is in typical ischemic maculopathy is not going to respond well to anti-VEGF, and the patient is going to have a poor visual acuity despite adequate treatment in cases of diabetic retinopathy. So optic disc is generally hyperfluorescent because of the posterior supply from the posterior ciliary system. This is a case of optic disc drusen, which is autofluorescing, and the flex of the fundus albipunctatus, which is undergoing autofluorescence. So in cases of hyperfluorescence, it can be retinal edema from the incompetent retinal vessels, RP detachment leading to pooling of the dye in the space, sensory retinal detachment, again leading to pooling in the spaces, window defect leading to increased transmission from the choroidal vasculature. So leakage across the blood retinal barrier from the inner retinal layer, we can see there's leakage of the dye, which is happening in cases of NVE. So this is a case where we can see there is leakage and there is a lacy network, which happens in cases of classic CNVM. So there is pooling in fluid spaces, as happens in CSCR, and we see pooling in the spaces. So the staining occurs in cases of abnormal drusens or In cases of scar tissues, we see there is staining of the staining due to scar marks. So, and increased transmission as occurs in geographic atrophy. So coming to the hypofluorescence, hypofluorescence can occur when there is non-perfusion due to retinal vessels, when there is blockage of the transmission by the blood or pigmented RPE or by choroidal pigments. So basically hypofluorescence can occur due to blockage by the media opacities like vitreous hemorrhage or at the level of the lens or at the level of the cornea. Pigment accumulation can block the fluorescence. The pigments basically blood and the melanin, and the filling defect. Basically the retinal vessels, which we can see the vessels, they are not being perfused, and we can see the filling defect over here. So coming to the case examples. So this was a case of a 40-year-old male who complains of recurrent blurring of vision with metamorphopsia, and her vision was 6/12. So apparently the FAZ appears normal, but we see a slight leakage over here. And this leakage is increasing with increasing phases of angiogram. So this is in blot appearance as it happens in CSCR. So one of the other appearance is a leak which is ascending vertically, and we can see with it is going to ascend vertically like an umbrella pattern, and this is called as smokestack appearance. So why is it important to know about these leaks in CSCR? Because it helps us to localize the leak and then do a focal laser in a case of recurrent CSCR. So this is a case of a 75-year-old male who presented with diminution of vision for more than 6 months. Now we see on a fundus autofluorescence, we see a high autofluorescing margin, and we see that there is a lacy leakage in the early phases, and which is increasing in size and intensity over the increasing phases of angiogram. This is classical CNVM. Coming to the this fundus photograph, we see exudation along with hemorrhage and intraretinal fluid. And we see that there is no hyperfluorescence in the early phases, but it is increasing as we increase over the phases, as we go proceed in the phases of the angiogram. So this is a classic case. This is a case of occult CNVM. So now we see that there is a narrowing of the arcades and leakage from this area, and this denotes a mechanical traction over this area by the ERM leading to leakage. And in this, it is very important to identify the leakage because the treatment is surgical by the level of the ERM. So we see NVD over here in the inferior part of the disc, and when we proceed on, we see NVD which is leaking. We see a filling defect, we see a CNP areas, we see a shunting of the vessels here in the between the healthy and the non-healthy area. So it is important to note all these things in our angiogram, because this is where we are going to use targeted photocoagulation to laser off all the capillary non-perfusion area to stop the pathophysiology in this process. So this is another example of the tributary vein, branch retinal vein occlusion. So one of the important places where angiogram finds an important application is PDR. So any cases of severe NPDR needs to undergo a FFA to rule out any pre-proliferative changes. So we see a blocked hyperfluorescence due to the hemorrhage here, and we can see multiple microaneurysms here, and we can see a leakage which is going on increasing. So these are places of NVE. So the another place where it is important to note is macular edema, because in focal DME we can do focal lasers to seal off the leaking points, whereas in diffuse DME we can go in for a modified grid laser. So this is a case of PFT, where the telangiectated vessels have straddled the horizontal raphe, and the leakage is increasing over time. So this is a classic ILM drape sign, and we can see the in the early stages, the fluorescence is increasing, and we can see the telangiectated vessels and the increasing leakage over time. So this is a case of where there is a vitreous haze and we proceeded on with FFA. We can see the perivascular staining here in multiple places. And then we see leakage over in the periphery and the non-perfusion areas. These all areas needs to be lasered over time. So these is the perivascular stain and these are the non-perfusion areas, and we see there is a leakage when the vessel traverses over the non-perfused area. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shivani. That was a wonderful, exhaustive presentation on fundus fluorescein angiography. Two quick questions. How do you relate, and what is the current situation in comparison to OCT? Where do you find FFA as of today? Because FFA basically is an invasive procedure, OCT being a non-invasive procedure. So how do you rate FFA as of today? Because 10 years back,
FFA has its own clinical implications, like in cases of severe NPDR, where we are suspicious of the patient may have PDR, the patients have to undergo FFA. In cases of recalcitrant macular edema, which is not responding to multiple anti-VEGF treatment, we need to have the imaging FFA in this patient, because we need to know about the non-perfusion areas, and we need to know about the leakage in these cases and know about the leaking capillaries. In cases of recurrent CSCR, we need to know about the leaking points in the to laser of those areas, or we have to know about the sick RP in cases of recurrent CSCR. In cases of vasculitis, in cases of uvea, we need to have a FFA. So I think OCT being we have to go on, we have to balance both these modalities, and they both have their own clinical importance in while managing retinal uvea and retinal vascular disorders.
And any pre-existing general condition in which it is contraindicated?
So pregnancy, it is contraindicated, and it is a very dicey situation in cases of raised creatinine. But we can have adequate hydration and a nephrologic clearance, and then proceed on with FFA. It's not a straight away contraindication, it is a relative contraindication. So pregnancy, besides pregnancy, it's good to go in every case after having a clearance from the concerned super specialty.
Do you need to have an anesthetist along with you when you are doing a fluorescein angiography, or can you do it alone?
Sir, in ideal situation, yes. But if we have a crash cart ready, and if we are ready for the resuscitation, then we can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Jayagopal, would you like to ask anything? Any of the?
No. We are running short of time.
Okay, right. So we go to the second presentation. If Dr. Devesh Kumawat is here, he's going to speak on OCT. And after that, we'll have Dr. Jayagopal Agarwal. Yeah. Welcome, Dr. Devesh, and the screen is yours, please.
Thank you, Dr. Pranav, for the introduction, and I would like to thank AIC for giving me the opportunity. So I'll be speaking on OCT, what lies beyond. So we know optical coherence tomography provides us with an optical biopsy of the ocular tissues, and it relates to or involves the light and optic, and it is based on the principle of low coherence interferometry. So what is low coherence interferometry is basically there is a diode light source which is in the infrared range, and there is a beam splitter which splits the light into reference beam as well as measurement beam. The reference beam, it goes into the goes and hits the reference mirror, and it is reflected back. The measurement beam, it goes into the ocular tissues, and then it is differentially reflected from the ocular tissues based on their density. And both these reflected beams are then detected by the detector and then analyzed by the OCT software. So at a particular point, we'll have an amplitude scan, that is an A scan, and when the multiple A scans are combined, then we obtain a 2D image of the ocular tissues, that is the B scan. So there are different domains of OCT which are available. Time domain, which was the oldest versions, and now we have the spectral domain and the swept source OCT. So in time domain, basically there is a single detector and there's a reference mirror which moves. Whereas in spectral domain and swept source domain, the mirror is fixed, and in spectral domain there is an array of detectors which detect the reflected light from numerous ocular tissues simultaneously. Therefore, the time to acquire the image reduces and the scanning speed is higher. The axial resolution of spectral domain and swept source domain is higher than time domain. And the range of imaging is also different. In time domain, we can only image between the VR interface to the retinal pigment epithelium, whereas in spectral domain and swept source, we can image from the cortical vitreous to the sclerochoroidal junction. So this is how a time domain, spectral domain, and swept source OCT will look like. In the spectral domain, without the enhanced depth imaging mode, the sclerochoroidal junction will not be visible. Whereas in swept source OCT, we can visualize the sclerochoroidal junction very well. So different protocols that we use for scanning the macular area are the macular cube, radial line scan, and raster line scan. So in a macular cube provides a 3D picture of the macular area, and it can be 6 into 6 mm or 7 into 7 mm or a rectangle of 8 into 6 mm. And radial line scans include 6 to 12, can have 6 to 12 line scans at equidistant angles. And raster line scans can be a single raster line or a 5 raster line or a 21 raster line. So this is how these images look like. And then next we have the optic disc cube, which provides us with the optic nerve head as well as the retinal nerve fiber layer values. So this is how a normal optical coherence tomography image of the retina will look like. And this is spectral domain OCT image. And all the membranes appear hyperreflective on OCT, and all the nuclear layers appear hyporeflective. So starting from the innermost layer, that is the, we can have a posterior cortical vitreous visible in certain eyes. Then we have the first retinal layer, that is the internal limiting membrane, that is hyperreflective. Then we have the nerve fiber layer, which is again hyperreflective. Then we have a hyporeflective ganglion cell layer because it is a nuclear layer. Then there is an inner plexiform layer, which is hyperreflective. Then inner nuclear layer, again hyporeflective. Outer plexiform is hyperreflective. Outer nuclear is hyporeflective. Then we have the outer retinal bands. The three important outer retinal bands that are the external limiting membrane, the ellipsoid zone, and then we have the interdigitation zone. So these constitute the three important part of the outer retinal tissues. And then we have the retinal pigment epithelium Brooks complex, following which we have the choriocapillaries and the choroidal vessels, and then the sclerochoroidal junction. So coming to individual disease pathologies in which OCT is very helpful. So VMA and VMT, it may be difficult to assess on clinical examination, and VMA will have an attachment of the detached posterior cortical vitreous from the perifoveal area, but attachment at the center of the fovea. And there will be no distortion of the retinal layers. However, in VMT, the retinal layers will be distorted because of the pull by the cortical vitreous. Now, ERM we can identify, but certain cellophane ERM may be difficult to pick up on clinical examination. OCT can very well pick up the hyperreflective epiretinal membranes and the effect that these membranes cause on the underlying retina, such as shown in the second image, where there is a distortion of the retina and a neurosensory detachment. Now, it is very important to differentiate between pseudo hole, lamellar macular hole, and full thickness macular hole, which may be difficult to differentiate on clinical examination. So pseudo hole has an epiretinal membrane, a hyperreflective membrane can be seen in the first image, which is causing a centripetal contraction, and a well-shaped deformation of the fovea is there. However, there is no loss of the retinal tissues. In the lamellar macular hole, there is loss of the retinal tissues and the edges are sloping. In a full thickness macular hole, there is a full thickness defect starting from the inner layer to the retinal pigment epithelium. So in macular hole, we know that it is OCT is of paramount importance in prognosticating both the anatomical prognosis as well as the functional prognosis. So we have different indices: the macular hole indices, the diameter hole indices, and the tractional hole index, and the hole forming factor, which can be computed based on the measurements. Now, OCT can be used to differentiate between subhyaloid and subhyalem bleeds. In subhyaloid hemorrhage, we can easily go ahead and do a YAG hyaloidectomy and drain out the bleed, but in subhyalem bleed it is very difficult because the level of bleed, the height of bleed is less, and we may injure the underlying retinal tissue. Diabetic macular edema, other than monitoring the diabetic macular edema with treatment, it also helps in characterizing the macular edema, that whether it is predominantly spongy, whether it is predominantly cystoid, or whether there is a component of traction. So the treatment will depend on what type of edema there is. If there is spongy edema, then patient needs the systemic control. If there is cystoid edema, then patient needs anti-VEGF therapy. And if there is a neurosensory detachment, then patient will need intravitreal steroids. And a posterior hyaloidal traction will need a vitrectomy to relieve the traction. There are certain OCT biomarkers of diabetic retinopathy which have prognostic importance. So one is the hyperreflective foci within the retinal tissue. So these are different from the hard exudates which are present in the outer plexiform layer or the inner nuclear layer. The difference is that these do not have a shadow posterior to them. And these are considered precursors to hard exudates, and presence of a numerous hyperreflective foci predicts toward future development of macular edema and macular exudation. Another important biomarker is the disorganization of retinal inner layers. If the inner retinal layers are disorganized as seen in the first photo, we cannot make out the different layers. What different layers are there? The ganglion cell, the inner nuclear, the plexiform. So this means the retinal inner layers are disorganized, and it points to a poor prognosis. It also helps us to determine the extent of the traction or retinal detachment. Sometimes it may not be it may be difficult to determine whether macula is affected by the TRD or not, because we want to take up the patient for surgery or not. So the tractional detachment extent can be made out on OCT. Other than identification of macular edema and monitoring of the patient with retinal vascular occlusion, there are certain features that occur in macular edema associated with CRPO. There is a differential edema of the inner retinal layers, because the inner retinal ischemia is occurring in vascular occlusions. So the inner retinal layers appear hyperreflective, and sometimes the middle limiting membrane may also be seen in such eyes. Again, in BRVO, a differential edema of the inner retinal layer will be there, but again, the differential edema will also be in a particular half of the scan. In a vertical scan, it will be either involving the upper half or the lower half. Next, we have the macular telangiectasia, in which there are characteristic signs may be seen. So there is a loss of the retinal tissue, and in advanced stages, we may have an ileum drape sign, in which only ileum is left and other retinal tissues are lost. In myopic maculopathy and tractional maculopathy, there occurs schisis of the retina, and this occurs due to posterior staphyloma and rigid inner retinal layers. So it is very difficult to pick up such features on clinical examination, and OCT helps us in monitoring and following the patients after surgery. Dome-shaped macula is again an entity which is difficult to pick up on clinical examination. It is important to do an OCT of all the high myopes, particularly the pathological myopes. Drusen appear as deposits which are present beneath the retinal pigment epithelium, and these are homogeneous, and these give an undulating appearance to the retinal pigment epithelium. However, sometimes the drusen can occur on the apical surface of the retinal pigment epithelium, that is between the retinal pigment epithelium and the retina, and these are known as subretinal drusenoid deposits or reticular pseudodrusen. The pigment epithelial detachments can be of 4 types. It can be serous, where the content is clear, and drusenoid when the content is homogeneous, fibrovascular when the content is heterogeneous, suggesting a CNVM, and a hemorrhagic PD when there is a posterior shadowing because of the heme in the pigment epithelial detachment. Geographic atrophy, in a case of geographic atrophy, will have an atrophy of the outer retinal bands, the external limiting membrane, the ellipsoid zone and interdigitation zone, and the RP, and sometimes outer retinal tubulations can be seen at the border. Choroidal neovascular membrane can be divided into 3 types and can be characterized on the basis of OCT findings into type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 1 occurs beneath the RP, type 2 above the RP, and type 3 is intraretinal. So pachychoroid disorder is another entity which has gained importance after the introduction of EDI OCT and swept source OCT, because these can image the choroid very well, and the abnormality which is common to these disorders is attenuation of the choriocapillaries and large pachychoroid vessels, pachy vessels. So the large vessels, they are prominent, and there are prominent large vessels, and these occupy most of the choroid, and the choriocapillaries is attenuated. These disorders include the central serous choroidopathy, pachychoroid neovasculopathy, PCV, and focal choroidal excavation. Coming to the inflammatory disorders in retinitis, OCT can help us determine the posterior vitreous cells. They can be made out on ultra high, in high resolution OCTs, and there will be edema and increased hyperreflectivity of the inner retinal layers. We can also make out whether the underlying choroid is affected or not, whether it is an isolated retinitis case or a retinochoroiditis case. In inflammatory disorders of the choroid, the OCT will pick up a bumpy RP. There may be multiloculated pockets of SRF, and there may be presence of posterior vitreous cells. And in addition to that, disc edema will also be there. So OCT will help us in differentiating certain cases in which we are confusing CSE with the VKH or sympathetic ophthalmia. OCT also helps us to differentiate between certain choroidal tumors, although ultrasonography standard, but choroidal metastasis, hemangiomas, and osteomas can be differentiated based on certain OCT characteristics. The recent other advantages in OCT include the NFAS OCT, which provides us with a C-scan. Basically, till now we were talking about a B scan. Now in a C scan, it provides us a surface image. And the benefit of MFAS OCT is that it helps us in precise localization of the lesions, that how extensive are the lesions, and even the minor lesions may be picked up on MFAS OCT. Another advancement that has been there in OCT is the wide field OCT for peripheral retinal pathologies and intraoperative microscope integrated OCT that helps in macular surface procedures. To summarize, OCT is a fast, non-invasive tool to study the ocular tissues by an optical method. And OCT, it should be interpreted in a systematic fashion, starting from the vitreoretinal interface, then the retina, then the choroid, and the sclerochoroidal junction, only after assessing the scanning protocol, that what protocol has been used, which area has been scanned, and what is the image quality. Then only one should interpret it. Now, OCT scan should be interpreted obviously in correlation with the fundus picture, and isolated OCT image, we cannot make out the diagnosis based on that. And the technological progress in OCT imaging is offering these days newer perspectives for better understanding of retinal disorders. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Devesh, for the first presentation. Is Dr. Shivani here? Can you unmute yourself? Dr. Shivani is a uvea and retina person from IGIMS. Quick question from Dr. Shivani to Dr. Devesh. Anything you want to add or to ask him?
No, sir, not now. We can ask
Okay.
the question at the end of the session.
Okay.
At the end, sir.
Just a quick addition to what Dr. Devesh has already mentioned is about glaucoma, because in glaucoma, you have the ganglion cell complex, which can be identified, which can be measured by the OCT. And various studies show that it can predict changes almost 6 years before what we can pick up in white to white perimetry. In that way, it is one of the better tools, and we can always have dependence on that. Thank you so much, Dr. Devesh. So we move on with the third topic. If Dr. Pranita Sahai is there, I would like to ask her. If not, Dr. Jayagopal Agarwal is going to deal with a very important topic, biometry and IOL calculation. This is very pertinent, and this is very important because it affects almost every ophthalmologist, and we have to see to it that we are perfect, almost perfect in doing biometry and IOL calculation. Over to Dr. Jayagopal Agarwal.
Whether my screen is there?
Yeah, your screen is visible, your voice is also audible.
Okay. Now, my topic is diagnostic pearls in the biometry and the IOL path population. Biometry in ophthalmology is the method of applying optics to the eye. Biometry is the key to achieve the desired post-operative refraction after cataract surgery, which needs accurate IOL power calculation by accurate biometry. There's a long journey of biometry from starting with the ultrasound and optical biometry, and now it is swift source biometry, as in JAI's IOL Master 700. The major factors affecting the IOL power calculation are the corneal curvature measurement, that is keratometry, central topography, axial length measurement of the eye, estimation of anterior chamber depth, personalized A constant or surgeon's factor, and prediction of effective lens position. What is keratometry? It is known to all of you, but I want to highlight some points that better to take the readings in the dioptric power in plus notation, as it is important in the incisional management of astigmatism using coupling effect. We could not ignore the posterior keratometry reading, otherwise we will land in post-operative surprise. IOL Master 500 gives only the anterior keratometry, so along with the Barrett, which takes care of the posterior keratometry to some extent, gives a more satisfactory result. Now, IOL Master 700 has a combination of both anterior, this is telecentric keratometry measurement for the anterior corneal surfaces, and swept source OCT technology to directly measure the posterior corneal surfaces. In this slide, we see that in the upper part, there is a telecentric keratometry reading for the anterior surface, and the lower part, it is a swept source OCT technology for the posterior corneal measurement. So in combination, we get the total keratometry reading. What is telecentric? It is distant independent, motion independent, and independent of focus and directly radius measurement and visual assessment of dot for tear film integrity. Now is the interface of the JAIS IOL Master 700, which shows the anterior keratometry, posterior keratometry, and the total keratometry. Now, central topography is very important to get the desired IOL post result. The central topography is integrated in the JAIL Master 700, and it is very important we get the central topography along with the other measurement. It gives a clear idea about the central topography of 8 to 4.8 millimeter range. With the other there is no changes in the workflow because it takes the reading along with the other measurements. The corneal irregularity in the central optical zone is regarded as the visually relevant. If you compare the JAIS IOL Master 700 with other topography, it is excellent comparability. Here in the slide shows the central topography of the JAIS IOL Master 700 and Galilei G4. Here it is with the rule astigmatism with the JAIS IOL Master 700, and same is the Galilei. And thus here we can advise the patient for the toric and multifocal IOLs. But in some cases where the central topography of JAIS IOL Master 700 shows against the rule astigmatism, but so the Galilei, though central area shows against the rule astigmatism, but the peripheral part, as there is some flattening, and this indicates the pellucid marginal degeneration. Here, the advice to the toric IOL is okay, but for multifocal or any other diffractive IOLs, it is not advisable. Now, there is some very important is the angle kappa. It is also called Chang varying chord. For IOL with diffractive rings such as trifocal, bifocal, or multifocal, to some extent the extended depth IOLs, we want to place the IOLs in the diffractive rings in the concentric with the center of the patient visual axis and as well as the center of the pupil, as influence the performance of the diffractive rings. Ideally, this will give the best visual performance and the best satisfaction of the patient if we place it in the central position. The first slide shows the visual axis and optical axis and the angle kappa and angle alpha. If we see through the microscope, if the three centers, that is optical center, pupil center, and visual center, are in very close proximity, we can assure that here the diffractive IOLs are will give the very good result. But in the below sides below, that is angle kappa, here there is a difference between the centers, and the angle kappa, which is angle between the visual axis and the pupil center of the pupil, is very apart. We have to pay attention to the angle kappa, because if its value is greater than 0.6, then the patient with diffractive lenses will have the halos and glare. There is an interface of IOL Master 700 showing the angle kappa, that is Chang varying chord, along with the measurement of the XY coordinate. In these slides, we show that angle kappa, which is summation of X and Y coordinate, if it is less than 0.6, then that is angle kappa reading, then it is good for all diffractive lenses and toric lenses. But if it is more than 0.6, then we should not avoid the diffractive lenses like multifocal, trifocal, or bifocals. For the axial length measurement, that ultrasound contact biometry is obsolete. It is almost history. The standard biometry is optical biometry, immersion ultrasound biometry, and B-scan biometry when necessary. Optical biometry gives the most accurate reading, is easy to get, and easily available to us, almost accurately reproducible. So it is our first choice. In the immersion biometry technique, the ultrasound probe does not touch the cornea. So there is no corneal compression, but it gives the reading up to the internal emitting membrane, not up to the retinal pigmentary epithelium as shown in this slide. Thus, there is a difference between 150 micron it is more than in optical biometry. So if we get the immersion biometry or axial length reading, we can convert to the optical biometry reading by Haig's calibration as shown in this formula. Now, in some cases, optical biometry will not be used. So, and where it will be advised to use the immersion biometry in the mature cataract with a strong PCSC, fixation difficulty, tremor and nystagmus, significant corneal and vitreous opacity, RPA defect, and pigment epithelial detachment and physical disability preventing the access. Fundus examination is the utmost important to get the post-operative result. Now, in IOL Master 700 gives us some idea of the macular pathology. In this slides, there is a macular hole, and in this slide, there is this star macular degeneration. So in these cases, it is very difficult to get a very good result. Now, precaution before the IOL implant is more important than its indication. Otherwise, dissatisfied patient will after surgery. The thorough preoperative examination helps us to rule out the following pathology: dry eye and meibomian gland dysfunction. As the tear film is the first refractive surface of the eye, so tear film integrity and is important. If it is not, then for dysphotopsia will occur, and so the preoperative investigation and along with the treatment is very important before surgery. We can also go for the corneal pathology detection, pupillary abnormalities. Pupillary abnormalities, it is very important in case we use the trifocal, bifocal, or multifocal lenses. For general weakness also important if it is so that capsular bag subluxation with the IOL decentration in future may occur. Glaucoma and optic nerve pathology is a not contraindication, but in case of diffractive lenses, it should be avoided. Macular disease, there is this reduced contrast sensitivity of the eye. So in these cases also, diffractive lenses are like multifocal, trifocal lenses should be avoided. Amblyopia and nystagmus should not be the ideal case for multifocal lenses. There are many situations in which we should have to validate the length and keratometry measurement. There are numerous situations in there. It is very difficult to discuss all the points in a very short time. But if it such occurs, then we should validate the axial length and keratometry with the same instrument or with the help of other instruments. Now, come to the IOL formulas. There are many IOL formulas in different situations, but the result is not perfect. No human can ever write the single formula that can take account of every adjustment and variables. So previously, we take the help of decision tree and then sort it that which formula it is suitable for this patient. But nowadays, there are many other formulas. But for the formula, the effective lens position is the main problem. It is a post-operative IOL position within the eye behind the cornea. It depends upon the accurate biometry along with the preoperative capsular size, severity of the cataract, post-surgical capsular contraction, and thus, even if there is a holiday formula for expected effective lens position, but it is still not accurate and it is still challenging issue when we use the effective lens position in our formula. Recent IOL formula of that, which for the accurate results are Oleson, Keynes formula, Barrett Universal 2, Hill RBF, and Rada Super formula. The Oleson formula is in the new concept for the ray tracing assisted intraocular power calculation with newly developed concept of C constant. C constant can be thought of as a ratio by which the empty capsular bag will encapsulate it and fixate an IOL following in-bag implantation. It is free from expected lens position, so it is good. Now, Keynes formula, as British Ophthalmology Journal, claims that it is more accurate than other formula, but it needs large cohort study and validation. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello, what is the problem?
You can again reshare your screen.
Yes. There
And,
is a problem.
and another 5 minutes after that, we have got 2 more speakers, please.
Okay.
Or if there is an issue, we can have a discussion, right?
Okay, just.
I think there's some this software.
There's some issues there.
Okay, right. Just try again. Yeah.
Yes. Whether
Yeah. Agarwal, 5 minutes, and after that you can.
okay. I am coming to the point again. Yes. Now, I have discussed about the Keynes formula. Now, Barrett's universal formula, it is based on the theoretical model considering the change in the principal plane along with the variety of errors by means of lens factor. But in this formula, expected lens position is used, but how it is calculated, it is kept secret by Professor Barrett. So, but it is very popular and gives the very accurate result. Hill RBF formula with a version 3. When we upload the data of the patient, Hill RBF finds a distinct pattern in apparently random clouds of data points already created by the large number of cases. So it is a pattern recognition based on the artificial intelligence. It is a purely data-driven, free from limitation of lens position and free from the limitation of inherent standard formula. But here they also the limitation, which gives the result as out of bound. With the data showing the prediction value may not match with the target outcome within 0.5 diopter or not enough data to validate. This is the interface of the Hill RBF formula. Now, LADA super formula, based on the creating the LADA super surfaces using the sweet spots of 4 formulas: Hopper Q, Holiday 1 with the Van Koch, and the Higgs. All the sweet spot amalgamated to form the LADA super. This is the interface of the LADA super formula. As soon as we enter the biometric parameters, then we get the result instantaneously along with the 3-dimensional graph where the surgeon can know what type of eye he is handling. Now, if we compare the LADA super formula with Barrett formula, if we plot the 2 graphs, then the blue area shows the identical result, but red area gives the different result. Here again, the LADA super formula gives the better results. Now, which formula to use, whether it is multiple, whether we should depend upon the anatomical consideration? These answers are very clearly given in the this American Academy of Ophthalmic Journal. And here we can get the answer, which formula of most accurate in all range of axial length. Here, the histogram shows the Barrett and Oleson formula gives the maximum number of cases within 0.5 diopter of this error. And here the prediction error is very low. So they are good. And now, if we consider the different IELTS power, here again, the Barrett and the Oleson, that is in the red line and the violet line, gives the horizontal, almost horizontal line, that shows the less prediction error. Similarly, if we consider the axial length, here again the Barrett and the Oleson gives the very good results. Which formula is the most accurate in all range of characterometric value, and which is the most for all range of anterior chamber depth? Here again, in both cases, Barrett and Oleson gives the very good results. Now, what is the effect of Van Koch optimization? If you add the Van Koch optimization, here again the Barrett and Oleson gives the minimum prediction error, so they are good. Now, in the patient for post-operative surgery, post-refractive surgery, the IOL ACR is the good, but Barrett 2K formula is better. It is shown in this article also. Now, what is the status of biometry in the silicon oil field? The ultrasound gives not accurate result. Here again, the optical coherent biometry with silicon mode gives a better result. Now, to conclude, the Barrett Torre calculator along with the Barrett TK universal 2 is the most formula accepted, and Hill RBF and Leda Super, it is artificial intelligence-based formula, will give the very accurate result and constantly improving over time. It gives almost 95% accurate result. Swept source biometry is the instrument of my choice. Thank you. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Agarwal, for the exhaustive presentation on IOL and biometry. Can you, yeah, stop sharing your screen? Yeah, you have already stopped sharing your screen. So, Dr. Pranita Sai, if she is there, she can take on the presentation. Dr. Pranita Sahai, if she is not there.
Dr. Pranita is not present, sir.
Okay. She has got a presentation in some other hall, so she will join soon.
Okay. Sir.
In the meanwhile, what I'll do, I'll start my presentation.
Sure.
Right? Okay. Just 1 second. Let me. So my presentation is going to be on perimetry, and perimetry, as you all know, is one of the most important tools in diagnosing glaucoma, not only diagnosing, but also managing glaucoma. And this is one topic which is really very interesting and important. No, not this is not the one. Stop sharing. I'll just.
Now you can start. It is very clear.
Yeah. But I just want to go to the slideshow. Actually, the slideshow is not visible. So I'll do one thing. I'll persist with this. Otherwise, I'll waste my time. Right. Let me see if there is anything which can be done to go to slideshow. There is a bar which is coming.
So see the down there is.
Yeah.
Showing.
Now I get it. There was a taskbar which was hiding it. How to remove this? Anyway, right. A normal field of vision is 60 degree nasally, 60 degrees superiorly, 70 degree inferiorly, and 100 degrees temporally. And sensitivity decreases from the center to the periphery, more so in the temporal side. We also know that sensitivity decreases with age at all locations, more in the periphery. And boundary between the seen and not seen is a border, and a scotoma is an area inside the border which is not seen. A blind spot is a scotoma, 15 degrees temporal and 1 degree below the horizontal axis, and measures 5 degree to 7 degree. There are few important things which we have to do in understanding perimetry. Is a light sensitivity. It is expressed as apostips or decibel units. A maximum intensity projected by the Humphrey, which we are going to discuss, is 10,000 apostips, and brightness is attenuated or reduced by using filters. So that means no attenuation is labeled as 0 decibel by convention. Thus, the maximum intensity is 0 decibel. That means a 0 decibel stands for the maximum apostips. What are the different definitions of threshold and suprathreshold and infrathreshold? A threshold is a particular intensity of light which is seen 50% of the times, suprathreshold seen 90% of the times, and infrathreshold which is seen 15% of the times. We come across another thing, which is the StatPack analysis, which you find in the Humphrey field perimeters. Is a computerized software analysis. It is based on the stored normative data and the patient test data that the patient undergoes. The lower 5% of the normative data is bracketed as abnormal. What it does is that it simplifies visual field interpretation between the normal and the abnormal, and it also helps us in identifying the changes in a series of visual fields so that we can understand what changes are taking place in due course of time. Another thing to understand is the predictive value or the p-value, probability value. The p-value is the probability percentage. It is assigned 10, 5, 2, 1, and 0.5%. And this is very important to understand because this is always assigned in the single field chart. Explaining this, p less than 1% means that the defect is only seen in 1% of the normal population. So in other words, the chances of this defect being normal is only 1%. Or in other words, you can say that this defect is not seen in 99% of the population. We'll come to it in the later slides and explain to you what it exactly stands for. The perimetry has got two components, the point pattern and the strategy. The point pattern is the different patterns of points that are going to be tested, because in a static perimetry, the point pattern is fixed. The strategy is the type of stimulus that we are going to create and we are going to put forward. And it is the full threshold and the threshold strategy. Coming to the point pattern, we have these 5 most common point patterns which we do in glaucoma investigation. That is the 30-2. It has got 76 test points, 6 degrees apart, which you can see on the left side here, which straddle the horizontal and the vertical meria, with a bare area, if you take into account the foveal threshold, is just 3 degrees. Likewise, we have in the bottom picture, we have the 24-2. It has got 54 test points, almost equivalent to the 30-2, except for the fact that the peripheral test points are eliminated except the 2 nasal. Then we have the 10-2. This is a magnified sensitivity test undertaken in advanced glaucoma cases. It has got 68 test points, 2 degrees apart. The 30-2 and the 24-2 had 0.6 degrees apart. This one has got 2 degrees apart with just 1 degree bare area. And if you take into account the foveal threshold, we have got a sensitivity of just 1 degree in the central area. Likewise, we have the macular program and the nasal step, which we do undertake in certain tests. The second component is the strategy, how we project the stimulus to it. The older strategy was that of the staircase bracketing method, which was also known as the full threshold strategy. And the stimulus intensity used to change by 4 decibels. And we used to project a stimulus of, for example, 32 decibel, then 28 decibel, then 24 decibel. And the threshold value was crossed here. So from 28 to 24, it will not be seen. Again, what it does is that we go back by 2 decibels. So from 24, we increase it to 26 and then again by 28 so that it becomes visible again. So what it does is it crosses the threshold line twice. So it takes more time. And the final resolution is 2 decibels. The newer threshold, what it does, it changes the intensity by 3 decibels only and crosses the threshold value only once. So what happens is that it consumes less time, and the patient's fatigue also is less in this case. The time saved is almost equivalent to 40%. There are a few checklists which we have to consider before we undertake the field test. That is the refraction with near vision correction. Pupil size should not be less than 3.5. Astigmatism should not be more than 3 diopters. Contact lens should be used for over 6 diopters. Refractive error, full aperture lenses in all cases. Cataracts cause generalized depression sensitivity. We have to understand that. We have to also consider neurological, vascular, and degenerative conditions. We have to repeat fields at least 2 to 3 times to establish a baseline. And we have to reset the baseline if a surgery has been undertaken or if there is a change in modality. So coming to the single field analysis, this is the heart of the Humphrey test, and this we come across so very commonly. So what we see here is that for the sake of convenience, we have divided into 10 zones, and it is just like a train journey from 2 different stations like Patna to going to Patna, from Patna to Delhi, stopping at various stations, taking information, gathering information from all stations, and finally at the end, accumulating all information so that the entire journey, what we have seen in the entire journey can be accounted for. So we come to area number 1. It has got the name, age, the ID number, and the test selected. We need to understand one thing very importantly is that the age should be correctly entered, because the data of the patient, present data of the patient, is going to be compared with the age matched data already stored in the software. The second factor is the reliability area, is the reliability factor, which has got 3 components, primarily fixation loss, false positives, and false negatives. A fixation loss is measured by almost placing 5% of the total stimulus on the blind spot, and any value which is more than 20% is unreliable. Positive responses, false positive are positive responses to no stimulus, and error more than 15% are unreliable. False negatives are missed responses, and that is because of a fatigued and inattentive patient. The fourth area here gives you the values which are already there, and the test which are going to take, like the Foveal threshold, the stimulus size, which is the Goldman 3Y, the background illumination 31.5 apositives from the Goldman, strategy, what kind of a strategy we are going to test, CETA fast or CETA standard, the pupil size, the visual acuity, and the refraction. And we must also note that the pupil size less than 3.5 millimeter will cause general depression and sensitivity. Coming to area number 6, this area number 6 is the most important area, and it is also known, it has the raw data and the grayscale. And the grayscale gives you a general impression as to what the hill of vision is like. It has got the raw data area, or the area 6 has the actual threshold values with grayscale. These values form the backbone for further analysis. Grayscale gives you a gross impression of the visual field. It is assigned 10 groups of 5 decibels bandwidth between 0 to 50 decibel, except for the last group, which is 41 to 50 decibel as one group. I'll skip this because we are running short of time. We come to area number 7. This is the area of total deviation. And this area of total deviation, I'll just explain to you how we get the area of total deviation. This XXX, what you see here, is the normative data which is stored as per the age of the patient. And this normative data and this present data of the patient is compared. And whatever difference we get in the total deviation. And the first digits that we see here is the total deviation numeric plot. And the second is the probability plot, which is known as the total deviation numeric plot. Again, going back to the p-value, which I had already stated, so I'll not explain it again. So this is total deviation, what I explained to you. And these numeric values denote the difference between the normative and the present data, giving it a probability percentage here, which is given in 5, 2, 1, and 0%. And from total deviation, we come to area number 8, which is the area of pattern deviation. And this pattern deviation, the pattern deviation numeric plot, has 2 components, the numeric plot and the pattern plot. And the numeric plot we get from the total deviation, and from the total deviation, what we see, the difference, how we get that, I'll just explain to you. This is how we get that. Point of the 24-2 of the total deviation numeric plot are considered. 3 points near the blind spot are ignored. Of the remaining 51 points, the 7th best percentile point is adjusted to 0, and accordingly, the pattern plot is obtained. This is how we get the pattern plot. This is -3 in the total deviation is the 7th best point here, and this -3 is adjusted to 0, -6. -6 here is the 7th best point, and this is adjusted to 0 by adding +6. And accordingly, we add almost +6 to all other points. And this is how we get the pattern deviation plot. And the significance of pattern deviation plot is that, for example, if the patient has got a cataract and a glaucoma, the sensitivity loss will be because of both. And the sensitivity loss because of cataract is uniform. Because of glaucoma, there'll be various depths, pits in that particular field. And this is how we get the combined cataract and glaucoma total deviation. And after filtering out the cataract part, what is left is the pit of the glaucoma, which is highlighted here. Coming to the area number 9, which is the glaucoma hemifield test, is the most sensitive analysis. 5 mirror images of different sectors of the two halves are divided, and they are compared to each other, and we get five. The reporting is as per 5 names: outside normal range, borderline, low sensitive, and high sensitive. I'll just explain one. Outside normal range, this means that the difference in any sector lower than or beyond 99%, or in a pair of sector lower than 0.5% of the total normal population. And borderline is a difference in any sector which is beyond 97% of the normal population if you compare the upper half and the lower half. Likewise, we have the low sensitive, the high sensitive, and if you do not have anything, it is reported as GHT is under normal limits. So global indices, we have 2 components here. One is the mean deviation. And what is a mean deviation? Mean deviation is nothing but a single numeric number which denotes the overall difference between a normative data and the present data signified in one single digit, giving it also a probability sign. So it is nothing but an average of the total deviation, which is given here in the mean deviation. Likewise, we have the pattern standard deviation. What is a pattern standard deviation? It is the dissimilar values here in the total deviation, and this dissimilar value can be accounted for by comparing the mean deviation with each of the values that you find here. For example, if you have got a cataract, the depression is going to be uniform. The mean deviation will not differ with the individual number here. But if there's a glaucoma, there is a focal depression, what will happen is that the mean deviation will show variation, a high amount of variation. This high amount of variation will show up in the pattern standard deviation. We have the visual field index. This is what denotes what the field is like and what we are going to see after 5 years. So this is a recent introduction into the Humphrey field system. It is expressed as 0 to 100%. 0% is blind, 100% means normal. It incorporates both the total and pattern deviation data, gives more weightage to the pattern deviation and the central points. So it gives you a prediction of over a period of time how the field is going to behave, whether it is going to deteriorate, whether it is going to stable, and so that you can apply your treatment as per the data. The Anderson's criteria, it gives you the sensitivity of what you have seen. The PSD depressed to be seen in 5% of the population, GHT outside normal limits, 3 or more non-edge points in pattern plot to be seen in less than 5% normal population, of which 1% should of which one should be less than 1%. If all the criteria are fulfilled, that means the probability of this field being glaucomatous is more. So with this, I'll just show you a few examples. This is the inferior arcuate with the nasal step here. Again, inferior arcuate with a nasal step, inferior arcuate, superior arcuate, advanced.
I am very sorry to interrupt, but we'll have to conclude your talk so that Dr. Pranita also gets 10 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And this is my last slide. This is it. The left side, you see the normal field. The right side, you see the abnormal field. Unless you do not understand the normal, you will not be able to differentiate the abnormal field. Thank you so much for your kind attention. And with this, I stop sharing my screen, and I'll invite the last speaker, Dr. Pranita Sahai, to get on with her talks. Dr. Pranita Sahai, if you are there.
Yes, she's here.
Yeah.
Ma'am, can you hear us?
Yes.
And I hope you can see my screen and hear me.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and I thank you for inviting me to this instruction course, and I thank AIS for this opportunity to present here. So I'll be discussing about corneal topography, decoding the hidden. So in this presentation, because we have limited time, so we'll be discussing mostly about Pentacam, because that is the most commonly used corneal topography system in most of the clinical setups. So the Pentacam was initially described by Theodor Schimflag, who first conceptualized the principle of Pentacam, and this machine uses two cameras, one for the fixation of the eye and the other which rotates around the eye to capture around 50 images in 22 seconds, and that ultimately captures 138,000 true elevation points for both the front and the back surface of the cornea from limbus to limbus. Therefore, it is important to understand it is analyzing the cornea from limbus to limbus and also both the anterior and posterior surface of the cornea. It assesses 5 parameters, that is the pachymetry, the corneal topography, the anterior and posterior corneal curvature, the astigmatism determination, and the Schimflag photography of the eye. So to begin with, when you capture a Pentacam image, this is what you see on I'll just start my pointer. Okay, so this is the position of the camera that is being shown, and this is the image of the pupil. This is the Schimflag image that is being captured, and this is for the alignment of your joystick with the joystick movement that will align the camera with the eye. Now, as soon as the image is captured, this image comes on to display, which is showing the image that is being projected here is the position of the camera, and the degree at which the camera is placed is shown here. And this is the 3D model of the anterior chamber. And on the right, you see the numeric display of the keratometry value and the pachymetry value and the anterior chamber analyzer. And the image on the right can be selected based on the parameter that is being selected here in this box. So here a corneal thickness has been selected, so a pachymetry map is being displayed. Before you proceed on to analyzing any Pentacam map, it is important to understand whether the quality specification of the map is okay or not. In case if this quality specification is not okay, or it goes into a red or a yellow zone, it is important to repeat the imaging and then analyze it rather than analyzing the current image. So next, after understanding the quality specification, it is the Q value that needs to be understood. The Q value gives us the shape of the cornea. The normal shape of the cornea is a prolate shape where the cornea is centrally steep and peripherally flat. And the Q value in this case remains negative and is between 0 to -1. In case of keratoconus, the shape of the cornea is hyperprolate and is less than -1. And after a high myopic photoablation or post-LASIK, the cornea becomes flat centrally, and that is an oblate shape of the cornea, and the Q value becomes positive. Now, before we understand the different maps, we have to understand the reference surface, which is a best fit sphere. So a best fit sphere is calculated by taking up the average keratometry of the patient's keratometry data, and it is a computer generated design or a shape for a best fit sphere, and it varies from patient to patient. And now the patient's keratometry map is compared with that best fit sphere to understand how the cornea is elevated or depressed or steep or flat at different points, and that comparative map is then analyzed to give different results. So the color scale is important to understand. Every map is color coded, varying from blue to red, and the elevation being higher than normal is suggested in red, and lower than normal is suggested in blue, and the red suggesting a high anterior elevation and the blue suggesting a low elevation. So this gray map here is showing your best fit sphere map, and the yellow is representing the shape of the patient's cornea. So we can see here in normal patient, as we discussed, the center is steep and periphery is flat. So the center part is raised above the patient's best fit sphere, and in the mid peripheral part, we can see that in the mid peripheral part, it is flatter compared to the best fit sphere, and in the extreme periphery, again, it is steeper than the best fit sphere. The same is represented in a color-coded fashion in the elevation map. So you can see in the center, as it is higher than the best fit sphere, it is yellow. In the mid periphery, as it is flatter, it is in blue. And in the extreme periphery, since it is steeper than the best fit sphere, it is going into yellow and red zones. Same for the astigmatic elevation maps. In the astigmatic elevation map, now we are discussing about the curvatures. So for a steeper curvature, which is present in the periphery and leading to a steep curvature, because of which it is falling within the circle of the best fit sphere, and hence that is represented in red colors in the astigmatic elevation curvatural maps. And if the curvature is flatter than the normal or the best fit sphere, then that is represented with blue colors, and the higher curvatures are represented with red colors. Now coming to the pachymetry map, the pachymetry is again color-coded map, the thicker cornea being blue and the thinner cornea represented in red colors. So here you can see that the central cornea is central, or the paracentral cornea is showing the red colors. And we can see that this plus here represents the center of the cornea, and the circle represents the thinnest pachymetry. So we can see that the thinnest pachymetry is displaced from the pachymetry apex, or the central part of the cornea, and which is often seen in patients of ectatic corneal disorders like keratoconus. Now coming on to the interpretation of this map, as we can see in this map, the quality specification index is normal, is okay, and hence we can proceed with the interpretation of the map. And this is the corneal front keratometry values, where we can see the values for K1 is 47 and that for K2 is 51.3, and it is already showing the value in red, that is suggesting it to be abnormal. And as we all know, a value more than 47.2 is a suspect for keratoconus. Hence we carefully move on to the assessment of the pachymetry values, where we can see that the pachymetry center is 437 and the pachymetry apex is 423, the difference being of around 14 microns. A difference in the pachy apex and center pachy, and the thinnest location is 410. So the difference in the pachy apex and the thinnest location here is around 13 microns. And a difference of more than 10 microns is again suggestive of ectatic corneal disorder like keratoconus. And next we look onto the elevation map. So if we look at the elevation map, the anterior elevation is going into plus 33, and a red zone can be seen in the central 5 millimeter zone. And the curvatural map is showing inferior steepening, that is the red spot or the hot spot area is in the inferior part. And the pachymetry map is also showing a hot spot or a red area suggestive of thinning. So we have inferior steepening corresponding with an area of thinning, and both anterior and posterior elevation in the same areas, all of which is suggestive of an corneal ectasia. The next map, which is important to understand, is the Bellin-Ambrosio enhanced ectasia display. There is some voice disturbance. Somebody is on unmute. If we can request them to mute. Okay, so the next map is the Bellin-Ambrosio enhanced ectasia display, wherein rather than using the best fit sphere, we use an enhanced best fit sphere. And the patient's corneal profile is then compared with the enhanced best fit sphere. And in this, subtle elevations or subtle areas of corneal ectasia can also be picked up. So it is really important for patients who are planned for refractive surgery to go ahead and see for the Bellin-Ambrosio enhanced ectasia display to rule out form fruste keratoconus, which can be missed if we look only at the 4-quad refractive map. So going on to the Bellin-Ambrosio enhanced ectasia display, this is the enhanced best fit sphere. It is calculated by excluding the 3 mm zone around the steepest part of the patient's cornea, and therefore the enhanced best fit sphere is a little flatter compared to the best fit sphere, and therefore subtle elevation and areas of elevation or ectasia can be picked up. The two important parameters to look into the Bellin-Ambrosio enhanced ectasia display is the corneal thickness spatial profile and the percentage thickness increase. The corneal thickness spatial profile measures the progression of thickness from the thinnest location to the corneal periphery, and it is divided into various zones. So here you can see it is starting from somewhere around 400 microns and then going up to 600 microns in the periphery. Now these black lines, black dashed lines at the bottom of the top represent 2 standard deviations below and above the normal.
Sorry to interrupt, ma'am, but we'll have to conclude this session.
Yes. So this is the Bellin-Ambrosio enhanced ectasia display, where you can see the corneal thickness spatial profile and PTI both are below and above both are outside the 2 standard deviation, and hence it's suggestive of corneal ectasia. So there are few screening parameters that need to be kept in mind when you are assessing any patient for refractive surgery, and these are just representative map. The first one, this is showing a regular astigmatism. As you can see, this is with the rule regular astigmatism, and wherein the bad profile is abnormal, and hence no refractive surgery should be planned in such patients, and they should be assessed after 6 months. And this is a case of pellucid marginal degeneration, wherein you can see the kissing dove appearance in the kissing dove pattern and inferior thinning in patients of PMD, and keratoconus that we have already discussed. This is a patient wherein we have a bow tie pattern with inferior steepening and skewing of the radial axis, and the inferior steepening is corresponding with thinning and the posterior elevation, all of which is suggestive of keratoconus. With that, I'll conclude my slides. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pranita. Doctors, any questions for her, please?
Out of time, so I'd like to thank all the speakers, Dr. Shivani Sinha, Dr. Devesh Kumawat, Dr. Pranita Sahai, Dr. Jayapal Agarwal, for the wonderful presentations. Hope we had enough of time for discussion and more elaborate, because these are topics which are really relevant and exhaustive topics. So thank you once again so much to all of you and all the viewers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pranav.